I took $1,000 and turned it into a six-figure online store, which allowed me to quit my job. So here's how I did it and why I've just shut it down. This is an unfiltered, raw look behind the scenes at my real revenue and profit, what worked and what didn't, and what I'd do differently next time. Most people won't show you what I'm about to show you, which is understandable, and I definitely wouldn't be going into as much detail if the store was still operating. My name's Andy and welcome to the channel. All right, so year one, 2014 to 2015, we're going to do it by financial year. So the business made $26,000 in revenue, or in other words, sales. And before we go over how much actual profit that translated to, let's talk about how I decided on a product idea and made my first few sales. So previous to this business, a mate and I did have an online store that kind of worked. I say kind of worked because it did actually make some sales, maybe like 5 to 10 per week, but the items we were selling only cost about $10 each. So we never actually made any profit once our running costs had been paid. Basically, we were heat pressing novelty slogans onto baby clothing. And at the time, neither of us knew anything about babies. Picture this, right? Me and my mate are having a meeting in our tiny little apartment in Brunswick West. And we're sitting there literally trying to guess how big a baby is for these clothes that we were making. Like, we just did not know how big a baby even was. That's how clueless we were. So for that reason, plus the fact that it wasn't really making any profit, we ended up closing that business. But I did take a lot of lessons from that business venture, because other than that, I had had no other formal e-commerce experience. And I think it's important for you to remember that, because I want you to feel encouraged, even if you feel like you're not qualified. So a few months after that, I was still hating my job and just couldn't bear the thought of sitting in some office doing robot work for the next 40 years of my life. I'd look at people who were 10 years ahead of me in their career and I'd just think, nah, mate, I cannot do that. That is so depressing. I can't do that for the rest of my life. At the time, I'd been plowing through heaps of books, audio books, podcasts, and I was feeling pumped, but I was seriously struggling to find a good product idea, to the point where it was becoming really frustrating. So one day I just said, right, I'm going to sit at my desk and I'm not getting up until I find something good to sell. And after about 4 hours of hitting dead ends, eventually I struck gold, because I found a thread on Reddit and people were writing these magic words: "It's a shame you can't get these in Australia." So I'd found a product that people were paying silly money for to ship it from the US to Australia. And if you ever find a product that's already proven overseas but not available locally, move on it. Bonus points if you can tweak it to improve it for your market or a slightly different niche. I won't say exactly what the product was, just to keep a bit of distance between myself and the business, but it was sports related home decor. So it was niche, kind of unusual, but it solved a very specific problem for a very passionate group of people, and that is the secret sauce. So using my basic grasp of Adobe Illustrator, I made one design and I ordered 10 pieces from a Chinese supplier I found on Alibaba for about 20 USD per piece. I made a one product store on Shopify and that was it. I was away. I think I was running Facebook ads at about $5 per day at the start while I figured out what was what. But I think I actually made my very first sale on eBay. If you're young and you're sitting there asking, what's an eBay? It's basically what us granddads had to use before we had Amazon in Australia. It wasn't great, but it did the job. About a week went past, made another sale or two, like one on eBay, one on Shopify, something like that. Sunday evening came round and I was dreading the thought of work the next day, as you do. And then I remember this bit clearly, right? So I'd been grinding hard. So I thought, right, I'm having a break. I watched a movie, and then when the movie ended, I checked my laptop and I'd made not one, but 2 sales just while I was watching that movie. So nearly $100 just while I was watching the movie. And this was the first time that I'd thought, okay, this could actually work. Like, I had proof of concept. I'd always thought it, but now I actually truly believed it. I was in my 20s at the time, so I didn't have much cash, to be honest, and $100 was quite a lot for me. My website was terrible. My logo was embarrassing, but none of that mattered. I was able to gradually improve all of that over time. The lesson here is don't wait for perfect, because you'll learn more launching badly with a subpar product and website than you will just waiting forever. Now, that first year, I'll be honest, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. But by the end of it, I'd made over $26,000 in revenue. And more importantly, I'd proven to myself that this thing could actually work, right? So, like, I had proof of concept. I ended up with around $2,500 profit, which isn't much. But for someone who used to heat press dodgy slogans onto baby onesies for no profit, that felt like a massive win. Year 2 saw some pretty good growth for a guy still working out of the corner of his apartment. I ended up making $66,000 in revenue, way up from the $26,000 in the year before. So how did I get there? Oh, and by the way, a lot of the charts and things you'll see in this video are from my Xero accounting software. If your business is anything more serious than a hobby, then I highly recommend getting Xero. It keeps track of everything, and without it, I wouldn't have a clue what to do come tax time. There's a link in the description, which is insane. That's an affiliate link, but as you can see, I've been loving it for over 10 years. So by the start of year 2, I had around 10 designs, had my website looking pretty smart, my Shopify site. I had a couple of Facebook ads doing okay, and maybe most important of all, I was getting some good word of mouth from my customers. I can't stress this enough, right? If your product or service is remarkable, meaning people feel the need to remark on it, that's half the battle won. You'll get organic word of mouth that amplifies every paid dollar you spend. So, for example, if it costs you $10 to acquire a customer, but they then convince a friend to also purchase, you've actually only paid $5 per customer. That's obviously a very simplified example, but hopefully you get the point. In essence, that's what it means to have a viral product. You're getting at least some organic spreading instead of relying solely on paid ads. Up until this point, I was still only placing small orders from my supplier in China, which were valued under $1,000 Australian, which meant I wasn't paying import duties or GST on imports. So if you're not aware, you pay import tax on any goods coming into Australia that are valued over $1,000 Australian. But I found I was constantly selling out because I just wasn't getting enough stock each time. So I had to start placing bigger orders and copying those extra taxes. But in doing so, I was then able to shop around and negotiate a better cost price. And the freight cost per item also reduced by ordering in bigger amounts, because if you double the amount of stock you're buying, the freight cost doesn't also double. It might only go up like 50%. And those savings more than offset the extra import taxes I was now paying. It's definitely at this point turning into a proper business. And being a proper business means proper volumes of customer service. I was still working a day job full time, and Tim Ferriss's 4-hour work week was pretty much my Bible at the time. So I outsourced and hired what that book would call a virtual assistant. I've never really liked that phrase because, you know, they're not virtual, they're very much a real person. And I found a great social media and customer experience manager. Based in Philippines, I connected with her through Upwork.com. I highly recommend using that platform. I will just say that I had tried a few other people before her who were pretty terrible, so we had to part ways basically. So what I'm saying is, don't be afraid to end contracts if it's not working out. Another challenge I was starting to experience was finding time to pack and ship orders. I was working on, how do I say it? I was working on growing my business before and after my day job, and the time I was dedicating to working in my business, doing fulfillment, things like that, was seriously stifling the time I had to work on my business, if that makes sense. So to solve this, I partnered with a third-party logistics company, otherwise known as a 3PL. I went for a smaller size 3PL, which meant I could actually speak to the owner whenever I needed, and I learned a lot from him. The topic of 3PLs is too big to go into detail in this video, but if you subscribe to this channel, you'll see me covering that topic along with others in the not so distant future. But for now, I'll just say that if you are looking for a 3PL, when you're choosing one, you should take an average month's orders and work out how much it will cost you with each provider you're looking at, because their pricing varies between each one. Like, some will have low shipping costs and high picking costs. Some are vice versa. Some are good if you have small amount of orders. Some are good if you have thousands of orders. So the best fit is going to be different for each business, depending on the size of your products as well and the volume of your orders. So you should also include Amazon FBA in your calculations, by the way, but just be aware that any savings with Amazon FBA need to be offset against the fact that you won't be able to just call the owner on his mobile when there's issues, and there will be issues. So hot off the back of outsourcing my customer service and fulfillment, I decided that global domination was next, and I needed to start selling overseas. Up until this point, it had only been Australia and New Zealand. In case you can't tell, I'm originally from the UK, so that's where I went next. It was fairly straightforward, obviously a whole new set of tax laws to learn, but being from there did definitely give me an advantage in terms of like figuring all that stuff out. I found another good small 3PL there, and it wasn't too much extra work because everything like product design, social media, etc. was just being duplicated for this new market. US is obviously the market most people expand to just because it's huge, but there was already a business selling something similar there. In hindsight, because the US market is so huge, me thinking that there wasn't space for two providers of the same product is a bit ridiculous. Anyway, the business was now about 18 months old. Things were going well, and we'd just had the Christmas shopping period. So I did what any entrepreneur would do in that position. In February 2015, I quit my job, and I experienced the freedom that I dreamt of every day for as long as I can remember. In March 2015, I emailed my old boss and asked if she could be a reference because I needed a new job already. Luckily, she's sound and I didn't torch the place on the way out, so it wasn't that awkward. Not ideal, and yeah, I ended up doing some temp work for an insurance company, which I hated. The only silver lining was that I was able to use my utter disdain for this new 9-to-5 job to motivate myself to keep pushing on my business. And I think that's the best. Just as a side note, if you do hate your job, try and get the benefit from it by using that hatred to push yourself into your business. I think if you have a job that's quite comfortable, sometimes you don't really try hard enough in your side business or your small business, because the expression I always think of is good is the enemy of great. So if your life or your job is just good, then you won't really do anything to change it. Whereas if it's terrible, you're going to take action to make it great. Let's talk numbers for the year. 66,000 revenue. But even though I'd more than doubled my orders versus the previous year, I actually made less profit. $681 for the year. And to think I thought I was ready to quit my job. It's also worth noting that when I'm talking about these figures, I was a sole trader, so I wasn't paying myself a salary. Whatever profit the business made, that was effectively my income before tax, obviously. On balance, it was still a good year as I'd invested in growth in Australia, as well as launching in the UK. So I obviously had to pay for all that new load of stock to go there. And would gain traction in that market pretty quickly, thanks to basically being able to rinse and repeat everything I'd done in Oz. While on the surface, it's not ideal to have no profit, it can be quite normal in the early stages of your business when growth is your main goal. But it's always a good reminder, especially when you're on YouTube and you're seeing these gurus talking about revenue. Revenue is not profit, okay? So next time you see someone trying to sell you a course and they're talking about their revenue, see if they also talk about profit. Year 3, 2016 to 2017. I quit my job. Was I ready? All right, year 3, and we crossed the big milestone and became a 6-figure business, from 66K annual revenue in year 2 to 198K annual revenue in year 3. And with a greater number of zeros comes greater responsibilities, including tax responsibilities. Because in Australia, when you make more than $75,000 revenue in one financial year, or like you expect to make more than that, you legally have to register for GST. So a 10% goods and services tax from every sale you make then needs to be paid to the ATO. Now, when you reach this stage in your business, you might decide to start adding 10% on top of what you were already charging. That's a fairly common practice in services, especially B2B or business to business. In product-based businesses, it's usually within the price. So you might decide to increase your pricing to keep your margins up. In my case, instead of putting prices up, I found areas to save money thanks to the bigger volume of orders that we were now doing. So for example, I negotiated a discount on buying my stock or ordering my goods basically when I ordered a certain amount. So that conversation basically went like me saying, hey, how many units would I need to buy to get the products for X amount per unit? And look, obviously I'd rather not have to give 10% of every sale to the ATO, but at least you can start claiming GST too. So for example, if you buy some packaging supplies, let's say for $200 from another business who's GST registered, you can claim back the 10% GST portion of that. And look, if you're in the position where you now legally have to register for GST, it means your business is growing. So well done. Like honestly, many people do not even get to that point. In September 2017, I quit my new day job, and this time lasted a bit longer, mainly thanks to it being Christmas time, because the business consistently made about 3 times the amount of sales in the Christmas quarter compared to other quarters. Or to put it another way, the business made half of its annual revenue in the Christmas quarter alone. So this rule pretty much stuck consistently throughout the whole life of the business. It will vary depending on how suitable your product or service is as a gift, but definitely something to think about when considering how much stock you need to order or manufacture at certain times of the year. You definitely don't want to run out of stock just when things are really starting to pump, i.e. Christmas time. Like if sales are flooding in and it's the beginning of December and you suddenly run out of stock, you're probably not going to get any more in time for Christmas and you've left a ton of cash on the table. So anyway, in terms of actually getting all those sales, the marketing was mainly paid Facebook ads and obviously the organic Facebook reach, which grew off the back of that. Possibly my biggest mistake was not throwing as much money as possible at these ads. I just didn't have the financial resources at the time, as I was already struggling to buy all the extra inventory I needed to meet demand, and I was already regularly selling out of key lines. If you're wondering, my funnel was very basic. I think just 2 layers really. Top of the funnel was usually reposts of customer posts containing a photo and them just saying how much they loved the product. This obviously gives you social proof, all that good stuff. And then I would also run at the bottom of the funnel a retargeting ad with like a 5% or a 10% promo code. So basically anyone who'd shown interest in the original ad or visited my site in the last 30 days would see another ad offering a small discount just to like push them over the edge into making a purchase. On top of that, there'd be some seasonal ads sprinkled in, like Christmas, Mother's Day, Easter. Between sending stock to Australia and the UK, I was making fairly big purchases of inventory. And I started thinking, is it a bit weird that every couple of months I'm like sending this amount of money to a business overseas that I've never even visited, to a contact who I've never even met? Now, I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that, as long as you've done all your other due diligence. And if you don't want to visit the factory you're buying from, you can always just like start pretending you'll be in the country soon and you want to visit. If they start reacting strangely, then that's probably a red flag. But yeah, I'd never been to China before and I was up for the adventure. So I arranged a trip. I got an official invite from the supplier, which is what you need for your visa. I then spent a morning at the Chinese embassy in Melbourne getting a temporary business visa. I booked some flights to Hong Kong and away we went. I spent a day or 2 in Hong Kong first with the missus, and then I did the day trip into Shenzhen on my own, and it was fun, man. As soon as I crossed the border into China, there was like no signs in English, like nothing, and I couldn't find anyone that spoke more than a few words of English. The backpacker in me enjoyed the challenge, but if you don't like the sound of navigating your way across a city on a hope and a prayer, then you should probably arrange a bit more help from your supplier beforehand. Anyway, I met my contact at the train station nearest to their factory, and she was great. First thing she says is, "You must be hungry." And I wasn't, but I'd read that it's polite to accept food if offered. So I said yes. What happens next is very funny because I had read on some forums that this exact thing might happen. She takes me to McDonald's. Now, I don't look very classy when I'm smashing a large Big Mac meal, so I just point to a picture of a McChicken sandwich. My contact then says, "You want more?" So again, not wanting to be rude, I ordered 2 McChicken sandwiches. She doesn't order anything for herself, which I thought was a bit strange, but whatever. And then when we got to the factory, we went into a meeting room and her boss just sat across from me at the table in silence, and they just watched me eat the aforementioned McChicken sandwiches. And yes, it was extremely awkward. It was as awkward as it sounds. Anyway, with that ridiculous moment out of the way, it was good fun. We had a tour of the factory. That was genuinely interesting. They showed me some new products they were working on. I was really impressed, to be honest, with just how immaculately clean everything was and how professional it all was. I'd heard we would be expected to exchange gifts, and sure enough, it wasn't long before my contact whips out a box of fancy tea, and I was very lucky that I actually had something to give back. So I hand over the bottle of Australian wine that I brought with me in a red bag. Never give a white bag. It's associated with death, apparently. Same reason you should never gift a clock. In fact, there are a lot of do's and don'ts around gift giving and traveling to China in general, but that's a video for another day. So make sure you're subscribed if you want to see that. After everything was done, my contact took a taxi with me to this like fancy hotel. We waited in the foyer for a bus back to Hong Kong. I definitely had a bit of, or not a bit, I definitely had a lot of imposter syndrome. Like every time I saw another Westerner around the factory, I remember thinking, man, I bet they're spending millions and I'm just here basically spending nothing, like with the amount I'm ordering. But at the end of the day, who cares? Like it was a really unique and fun experience that I'm still proud of to this day. A day job didn't send me there, you know. I wasn't sent there on a work trip by the company I worked for. It was all off my own back, and it was a business trip for a business that I had created from scratch. So if you ever find yourself in a similar situation, not necessarily visiting like a factory overseas, but whenever you feel a bit of the old imposter syndrome creeping in with a business that you've created, then just keep your head up because you've done something that so few other people have. All right, just before we talk money for this year, here's a slight downer. In June, me and a load of mates went to the Philippines for my 30th birthday, and it was the absolute mutts nuts. Now, that obviously isn't a downer in itself, but I had to afford it somehow. And at the time, I was just scraping by, basically, which was fine, like eating chili con carne about 5 nights a week. But obviously, I needed some extra cash for the holiday. So I got a job again. In terms of running the business while on holiday, I was pretty much doing the 4-hour work week. So full circle back to the Tim Ferriss book. I was basically just spending about half an hour sending emails and checking things like every 2 or 3 days. At one point, we were staying on this private island for a few days, which had no internet. So I had to climb up this huge hill every morning with my laptop, like some little shorts, no shirt, like thongs or flip-flops, carrying my laptop under my arm up this massive hill, sweating my bits off just to try and get a bit of like, I don't know, it must have been like 4G or something, or maybe even 3G at the top of this hill. I must have looked like an absolute nutter, to be honest, but yeah, all part of the fun. Okay, money. So 198K for the year. And you're probably thinking, okay, Andy, surely this year you made some decent profit. Well, over 2,000 orders. Sorry to disappoint. 23.7K profit. So 23,700. And this is the reality of these side businesses, right? Or any product-based business. And something I've spoken about in other videos. You will make more revenue than you think, or at least I was making more revenue than I expected to make, but you'll make less profit than you think or than you expect. My story does get better, you know, I promise. So stick with me. And look, I was still growing and constantly, you know, blowing a grand here, grand there on trying new products and experimenting. So if I had wanted to dial it right back, not worry about growth and just take the profit, that number would have been much higher. Speaking of much higher, year 4, annual revenue grew from 198K to 280K, over $250,000 sales in just 1 year for a bloke with no professional training, remember, other than what I'd learned online and from books and audiobooks and podcasts. Before that, the closest I'd come to any sort of formal training was working in a clothes shop when I was 15. And to be honest, all I really learned there was how to fold clothes and talk to girls on the bus. After I'd got back from my holiday in the Philippines, I went part-time at my day job. This is something I recommend to everyone who's trying to transition their side business into a full-time business. In fact, if I'd gone part-time in the first place, instead of quitting completely, I'm almost certain it would have been more sustainable and far more productive than the stop-start full-time employment I was doing. Working 2 days a week covered my rent, bills, and food. Again, shout out to my mates Chili con carne and spaghetti bolognese and all the mince crew. I then had the other 5 days of the week to build the business. In August, I went on another overseas trip, this one a bit of a longish one, for a Bucks weekend in Romania, and then to UK for a wedding. There was about a month in between those two events, but because I had the 3PL in place in Australia, I basically just worked from the UK in that gap, and it was business as usual, you know. It was like working from here kind of thing. Things were looking good. Facebook ads were getting such good ROAS that I thought I didn't need to do other stuff. But to be honest, that was the wrong mindset. And at this point, I decided to course correct and try and add some different marketing to the mix. Now, these two old school marketing methods I'm about to talk about might work for your business, they might not. So my advice would be start small and analyze. So first I tried paid magazine ads, but only in publications that were a perfect fit for the brand. So niche magazines, they were okay. They were good for brand awareness, I guess, but I don't think I even broke even in terms of sales versus ad spend. So like I say, start small and analyze. Definitely don't go and drop 20 bags on a mainstream magazine advert before you at least have some idea of what results you can expect. Also, ads like that should always be considered part of a funnel. So people are unlikely to see a magazine ad and instantly go and look up your website and make a purchase, but they might be more likely to make a purchase when they see your Instagram ad if they've already seen your magazine ad. Again, just be cautious as they can be very expensive, and I definitely wouldn't recommend it if you're just starting out. The next thing I tried, however, was an absolute banger, and it could even be suitable even if you're just starting out. As long as you've already got proof of concept, i.e. some interest and some sales, the marketing method I'm talking about is expos. So that might be a trade show or it might be an exhibition, anything where you can get like a stand or a booth at an event that will be attended by your specific target audience. So I did a 4-day expo at a big sporting event and I made a month's worth of sales in just 4 days. Thursday to Sunday, that was it, a month's worth of sales. So not only that, there was an unmistakable jump in website traffic and online sales for the following couple of months. As well as selling heaps of products on my stand, I also handed out flyers with like unique 5% promo codes on them so I could tell where they'd got the code from and they'd been at the event, obviously, right? And that also brought in over like $1,000 worth of online sales. At this point, I'm thinking, wow, now I've really cracked it. However, I then did a couple more expos and I barely even broke even on those. So the lesson here is just because one expo is good for your business, it doesn't mean they all will be. But you kind of need to test each one to find that out. Then just keep doing the good ones and, you know, kick the rest to the curb. You can chat to other people exhibiting at trade shows and expos. They're normally very friendly and will happily share their thoughts on which expos are the good ones, which are the bad ones. To be honest, yeah, they love to talk, basically. Quite often there'll be other small business owners, much like yourself, so you can make friends of them because you'll have found people living, you know, a similar life to the way you're living. If you're just starting out and budget is really tight, you can try and find like free local events, maybe a farmer's market, or if you're a business in like a sports niche like mine was, then you can try like local sporting events. I don't know, like local sort of sports games, swim meets, fun runs, anything like that. You get the idea. These small ones won't have anywhere near the same amount of people as the big paid events, but you'll probably only need to make a few sales to make it worth it. And also another side benefit is that you'll be able to talk face to face with your customers and get super useful live feedback on your products. Like especially if you bring out like a new product, you can get like live feedback. You may not have even launched it on your site yet, and you can show it to your customers and get live feedback, and then you can make adjustments and everything based on that. Also helps maybe with your pricing strategy. Like, it's really good. That's a really good side benefit that I wasn't expecting. Also, over the course of a few days, especially at that first event, I was really able to like hone my sales pitch and the messaging around my product and my brand, and really like lock that in so it's tight and persuasive. And I was then able to copy that messaging and branding, like communications, if you like, over to all my other online assets. And yeah, again, another benefit from doing these expos. The extra boost these expos provided meant I could then leave my part-time job. Well, I don't know how many times I've bloody left my job and then got a new one. And yeah, anyway, part of the journey. It's funny because I always hated my jobs, but the last couple I'd had at this point, I actually liked them, and they seemed to like me looking back. You know, like they were trying to sort of offer me like permanent roles and things like that. And I think that's because I just had like a much more positive energy about me, because I knew I was building something good. Like, if you're passionate about something and you have a purpose in your life, I think you just have a more positive energy about you, and then that like spills over into other areas of your life. So when you're in that situation, just holistically, everything in your life just clicks better. I don't know, mate. Do you understand what I'm saying? So with all the extra time I had from not needing a day job, I was able to actually launch another Shopify store, still sports related, but different enough to need its own store and completely different brand and all that. This business went on to do okay, some steady sales and a little bit of profit, but nothing like my main business. Now, in terms of profit for the main business, I made $38,000 for the financial year, which back then was above minimum wage. So again, that's another big milestone crossed. Building something I loved, learning every day, having time to run or work out every day, had a ripper holiday with a little help from my temp job. And I think I was finally starting to get the hang of things. I totally get that a lot of people will scoff at that amount of profit, but it was a good, honest business built by an inexperienced guy in his 20s with zero debt. By the way, if you're about to start a Shopify store, don't just go to shopify.com and start a store there. Click the link in the description of this video, because you'll be able to save money by doing it that way. And that's an affiliate link, so I'll get a little kickback as well. Everyone's a winner. Year 5, 2018 to 2019, the year of the copycat. So by year 5, things were really rolling. 363,000 revenue, well over 4,000 orders. But something you learn when your products start doing well is that the copycats come calling. So I started seeing my products on Alibaba, and I don't just mean similar products, I mean actual photos stolen from my website that I'd taken myself in my garage. Like, that's how mad it was. I even found a store in Australia selling like knockoff versions of my products, but made from like a cheaper material. So not only was I shocked about like just the absolute brazenness of it all, but I was worried that my business could end up itself looking like a copycat. Like, I was just buying them for cheap off of like AliExpress or whatever and slapping a big markup on them, when in reality I was the one creating the designs myself, right? And I'd built the business from the ground up. So I sent a cease and desist to the online store in Australia. Just got a template off somewhere and just emailed it to them basically. That then stopped them, or they stopped selling after receiving that letter fairly quickly, like within a couple of days. Then I had to lodge some complaints with Alibaba. Now, I don't know what the process is like these days, but back then it was painful, man. So basically I had to prove I was selling them first before these factories, right? Which isn't easy when these factories, which most of them are probably not even real factories, they were like making fake invoices from years before. And I was like, well, yeah, funny how you're doing that, because that didn't even exist at that point, you know? So I ended up having to use software to prove that their invoices had fake dates on them based on the metadata of the files. So these little battles, like that sort of stuff, was going on for months. And although I never felt like Alibaba was particularly supportive of my side, eventually these copycat sellers did stop selling my designs because I guess they got tired of the hassle I was causing them. Now you might be wondering, why hadn't I like patented them? I think basically because they weren't unique enough. Like, similar things did exist, so it would have been hard, if not impossible, to get a patent for them. But yeah, like I said, these people were taking my exact designs and my pictures and copying them, which is obviously, that's no good. By this point, I felt reliably full-time in the business, and revenue was good enough that I figured I had capacity to do my own fulfillment. Like, I felt I wasn't going to have to suddenly get a job again. Um, and I'd also just moved to a house with a garage. So I had the perfect space for like a mini warehouse in the garage. So I parted ways with the 3PL that I'd been with for many years, which was quite sad because I'd learned heaps from the partnership, but it meant about an extra 10K to 15K annual profit for me, sorry. So I divided that by the extra time it took me to do my own picking, packing and shipping. And the hourly rate worked out to be about $40 to $50. So basically, by me doing that work, that's how much I would have been earning per that hour, which at the time, for me, that was very good. Like, this is a few years back. I already have another video on the channel that goes into more depth about shipping, particularly with Australia Post. So make sure you check that out after this video, because Australia Post is an interesting beast. But just to talk quickly about it in this video, obviously I saved the cash by doing the fulfillment myself, but I also learned more about the products, and pretty quickly I ended up improving the packaging, just because I was literally staring at it every day. Like, while you're doing all this, you're sort of going, the ideas come, why don't I change this? Why don't I improve this? So that's basically what started happening. Obviously I lost a lot of time, especially at Christmas, where the orders were coming thick and fast. So if you're still working a day job by the time you get to this volume of sales, just know that it's going to be pretty hard to find time for like anything else if you're doing your own fulfillment as well. But it did mean, here comes the profit number, it did mean $69,000 profit, which for the first time was probably more than what I would have earned from a day job at the time. So that was an absolute massive milestone, if not the biggest milestone. That's what everyone dreams of, right? Going full-time, replacing your full-time income with a business you build yourself. For the first time, I was living comfortably, not stressing about bills. I was tucking savings away. I was investing a bit in shares, crypto, all the things a normal person does. But the key difference is I was doing it with something I'd made from scratch, like from nothing. No debt, no boss, no begging for time off, no apologizing if I want to spend an extra half hour at the gym in the morning, no office politics, no backstabbing, just an idea, blood, sweat, tears, and some delusion level faith, basically. Like, you need to have so much faith that from the outside you look almost delusional. There will be times that that's all you have. So your sales data might tell you it won't work. Your bank balance might be telling you this is not working. Your friends and even your family might like roll their eyes when you tell them your plans, right? But that's okay, because as long as you know, like, as long as you sort of feel it, right, and you make a commitment to yourself that you're going to make it work, then eventually it will work. And trust me, it will be worth it. Year 6 of the business began with me planning a 6-week trip to Europe, starting in September. I've been invited to a wedding in Tenerife, a Bucks weekend in Portugal, Sail Croatia, Oktoberfest in Germany, and then another wedding in Poland. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to get another job at this point. But the problem was, unlike the last times I'd been on holiday, I was now shipping my own orders. So I weighed up if it was practical to hire someone to do it while I was away. But I decided that I just wouldn't feel comfortable doing that, especially as they'd have to be working from my home. So I went back with a 3PL, this time a fairly new one with competitive prices. And just like the long trip I'd done a couple of years prior, everything went pretty great. Like, the 3PL was handling fulfillment. I still had my part-time social media and customer experience manager handling all that side of things. I was basically logging on for about 20 minutes a day to check my emails, tweak my ads, order stock about once a month, sometimes from like a sun lounger in the Canaries, sometimes from the top bunk of a hostel in Munich. Like it was mad. I was living the dream. By the time I came back to Melbourne, Christmas shopping period was well underway. And by my standards, the business was absolutely killing it. Like it made $165,000 in sales just for the Christmas quarter alone, and $72,000 just in the month of December alone. Like honestly, everything was great. I had felt like I had reached the promised land. Then in early 2020, everything changed.
China has identified the cause of the mysterious new virus.
Coronavirus.
There are fears a rapidly spreading virus has reached Australia.
This is a rapidly emerging situation where there is not a cause for alarm.
The first US case has been detected.
There's confirmation the coronavirus has reached Australia.
Not only did my whole world turn upside down, everyone's did. If you're young and you don't really remember that time, or you've just tried to put it out of your memory, and I wouldn't blame you if you have, it's hard to describe just how much uncertainty there was at the time, especially at the beginning, right? Because no one knew just how bad things were going to get or what was going to happen next. We literally didn't even know where our next roll of toilet paper was going to come from. Lockdowns began, people started working from home. And at first, the business benefited from that because there was like a home DIY boom and everyone was kitting out their home offices. But then all sporting events were cancelled, or at least like community sporting events for everyday people. And they were my customers. So this led to a terrible June in terms of sales. And this caused my annual revenue to decrease for the first time ever since the birth of the business. So from 363K the year before to 361K. Now, profit also dropped from 69K to 60K. Obviously, I'm super grateful that everyone I know was okay health-wise, but just as my business was having real success, it got rug pulled by life. Year 7, 2020 to 2021, the first casualty. Unfortunately, in the following financial year, these poor sales continued. I wasn't doing expos because they weren't on. My customers weren't doing sports in the same way. It's interesting because I remember a lot of Shopify stores were doing really well at the time, judging by what was being said on the forums and stuff, especially when government started handing out cash to everyone. Now that cash had to go somewhere, right? And certain niches thrived, but just not mine. It was getting harder and harder to get stock into the UK as they had lengthy and, unreliable quarantine times. I guess because they were saying, whoever packed the goods in China might have accidentally sneezed in the box or something. I don't know. But with all this extra hassle on top of the dwindling sales, I made the very difficult decision to close the UK side of the business. I did feel really bad for the 3PL because I think they'd already also lost another few clients for similar reasons. But with no end in sight, I did what I had to do in order to keep my focus, or keep focused on keeping the Australian operations running and keeping them as profitable as possible. Also, do you remember that other Shopify store that I started in 2017? That was also sports related and was doing okay, I said, but not amazing. Well, in 2020, I closed that down too. This time I sold it using the platform flipper.com. From memory, I think I only got like a couple of grand for it, but there was like no stock left. So basically just sold the IP, branding, domain name, like social media assets, supplier lists, product designs, etc., things like that. I think both parties were quite happy with the deal, and the brand actually does still exist today. I had a look when I was prepping for this video. They've branched out into a couple of new products and they seem to be doing pretty well. So I'm genuinely really happy for them. Like, still the same logo. So that was nice to see. That was the first time I'd ever sold a business, but it wasn't long before someone contacted me out of the blue to buy another business. Well, sort of. So I'd been sitting on a pretty good domain name for a couple of years, which I genuinely had intended to build a new Shopify store on at some point, but I'd never got around to it. And I was hesitant because the business that you would have to build on this domain would have been extremely seasonal, because it literally had the word Christmas in the domain name. So when a business from New Zealand who owned the .co.nz version of this domain name emailed me and offered me just under $2,000 for it, I decided to sell that too. Literally just the domain name, and that's it. They were expanding to Australia, so it meant they wouldn't have to change any branding, and they also, you know, removed a potential future competitor in the process. And I'd made, you know, getting on for $2,000 from something I'd paid about $10 for. I should point out that I have also tried to buy domain names purely for the purpose of reselling or flipping them, and it's worked a grand total of 0 times. Like, I haven't made a penny doing it, and I've spent hundreds in domain fees. The 2 times I did sell a domain for a decent profit, they were domains I'd either actually started a business on or I intended to start a business on. So there's a lesson in there somewhere for you. In case you're interested, I sold this second domain using escrow.com, which keeps the money safe until both parties confirm the domain has transferred successfully. And I use Crazy Domains for buying domains. They're in Australia. They seem to be one of the cheapest, if not the cheapest, and they make it really easy to set up a Gmail account with your custom domain name. I've also never had a domain name hacked with them, which I can't say about one of their market leading competitors. So if you're looking to buy a domain name, there's an affiliate link in the description of this video that will save you an extra 12%, and it will help support this channel. But anyway, I put the cash from these 2 small little business sales back into my main business. But despite that, it was still struggling. Like, there was just less demand. And as a result, my main source of sales, Facebook ads, basically I was having to spend more to get the same results. And I also think that's due to the fact that by this point, huge multinational brands were now just throwing millions at Facebook ads, right, and Instagram ads, which they weren't doing so much when I started the business back in 2014. Also, the Aussie dollar wasn't worth as much as it used to be. So all of this basically led to a perfect storm of Facebook ads just not being as good as they used to be. So I think the lesson here is that you should never be too reliant on one method of marketing, because it can always be pulled out from underneath you. Like I said, expos had also stopped, but I did have a very good email list and a pretty good social media following by this point. So that helped me. But despite that, revenue for the year fell to a very disappointing 212,000 with a net profit of just 45,000. Again, if we were on the way up, those would be good numbers. But at this point, it looks like we're on the way down, right? On a side note, I started a YouTube channel in January 2021, 18 months before the one you're watching now, but I gave up on that channel after just 5 videos. Giving up on that channel is probably my biggest regret from lockdown, because it was the perfect time to start a channel, because obviously everyone was stuck inside watching YouTube, but also I had time. So yeah, and who knows where we'd be by now. But anyway, if you're interested in seeing how bad those early videos were, here's a quick clip for your enjoyment. Hey guys, Andy here, and you are watching Anything But a Job, the channel where we try and make some money by doing anything but a job. This is my first ever video on the channel, so if you're thinking, this is a bit rubbish, well, you know why. So anyway, I thought I'd kick things off by listing the top 3 mistakes I made when starting my e-commerce business, which was about 6 years ago now. Okay, I'll probably play some music here with that intro. Year 8, 2021 to 2022, the Valiant Fightback. In Melbourne, our final lockdown ended in October 2021, and the Fightback was on. So my plan was to continue with the strategy of having things stripped right back, focusing only on the things that I knew worked, and then just slog my way through it. This started with taking my fulfillment back in-house. Again, I did feel bad about it, as most businesses were still struggling. even though lockdowns had ended. But at the end of the day, it was costing me about 15 grand a year. So cutting that out was an instant boost to profits. The big expos weren't back yet because they were obviously take many months to plan. So online ads was basically my sole sort of source for sales again, mainly Facebook, Insta, and Google. However, I think I was a little naive to think that the landscape wouldn't have changed during the 2 and whatever years it was of semi-hibernation. So do you remember those Alibaba copies I spoke about back in 2018, 2019? Well, they were now flooding the Australian market. Not my exact product, but similar products, right? Thanks to the continued growth of platforms like AliExpress and Amazon. And yes, if you're watching this from outside Oz, we didn't really get Amazon properly until around this time. And they were buying Google ads. So I was now paying way more on Google ads to compete against ads from these marketplaces. And even with Facebook ads, I think some people were discovering my products on Facebook and Instagram and then price checking on Google and then coming across the copycats. Now, the copycats were definitely inferior products and people buying them would have known that, but every market will have a percentage of people that prioritize price like above everything else. So I basically lost that slice of the market. I didn't want to try and compete with them on price because it would have meant reducing the quality of my products. Like there's no way I could compete on price without doing that. And that's just a super hard fight to win because you're up against people who are just importing like huge containers of all sorts of random stuff on very slim margins. Like that's what they do. They're professionals at it. They've spent their whole life doing it, right? So I stuck to my guns. I remained as the premium option in Australia and I put my prices up slightly. So in hindsight, I probably should have put them up more. Just in case you don't remember, it was around that time that we saw huge inflation on like everything. So not only did my cost of goods go up, but so did like my software, my packaging, shipping, phone bill, everything. But despite all that, I did manage to stop the bleeding. So revenue for this year was $212,000. So the same as the year before, and profit was 46,000. So up just slightly versus the year before. So it was okay, but didn't live up to my hopes for like the big reopening of the economy. I thought we were going to get right back to where we left off. I sort of, by this point, was starting to worry. I'd also started doing a few shifts on Uber Eats and DoorDash to make ends meet. Year 9, 2022 to 2023, the beginning of the end. So at the beginning of 2022, I was beginning to lose faith that I'd ever be able to get the business back to where it was. And if I'm completely honest with myself, I'd lost a bit of the passion that I'd once had as well. Also, think back to the start of this video where I said I didn't know how big a baby was. Well, I was finally going to find out because we were expecting our first baby in December. And by we, I don't mean me and my mate I started a business with. I mean me and my missus. And obviously that was now by far the biggest priority and therefore the biggest consideration in like every single decision. So in August, I took a full-time job, if nothing else, just for the stability and the reliable income that comes with that. Like it's mad. Like I've always been okay with risk because I've always backed myself to get out of like any sticky situation. But when you have a kid, that all changes. Like I did feel like a bit of a sellout. And if I'm being truly honest, like a bit of a failure. Like it was hard to adjust for a while. I heard a quote the other day actually in an audiobook I'm listening to called The $100 Startup. And it was like, there's no rehab program for being addicted to freedom. And once you've seen what it's like on the other side, good luck trying to follow someone else's rules ever again, basically. Yes, tough, man. But anyway, first world problems. So my full-time business at this point was very much a side business again. So expos were back, but the cost of doing those had increased a little. They still did okay though, but despite that, revenue for the year had dropped again to $181,000 with a profit of just $32,000. Obviously, if you add that onto my full-time income from my day job, I was doing all right, but like I was very busy, and to be honest, it got to the point where like I was working sort of every weekend and almost every night. And to be honest, I was getting stressed, man. Year 10, 2023 to 2024, side business or part-time job. So by this point, as I said, it was definitely just a side business, but to be honest, it felt more like a part-time job, and a part-time job that I didn't particularly enjoy anymore. So a little bit because I was doing my own packing and shipping late into the evenings and weekends, but mainly because I'd lost the connection to it. Like I'd lost the passion for the product and even the brand, and that probably then affected every part of the business, even if I didn't realize it at the time. It's quite a unique situation when you realize your business is in decline, and maybe you'll only sort of truly understand that fully if it ever happens to you. It feels like kind of like a part of you is dying, or at least like a part of your identity is dying. This business, it had been such a huge part of me for like over a decade, and like my life and thoughts and everything had revolved around it for so long. But I had a new passion now, and that was my beautiful baby daughter. She's my whole world now, and I'm definitely not saying you can't have a baby and a side business at the same time, but if the side business isn't one you're passionate about, I can tell you now, having to work on it after you've barely had any sleep is just not the one. It's not going to work. So predictably, revenue for the year fell quite substantially to 137,000 with a profit of 15,000. So not even a good margin, to be honest. Well, I say that, but it depends again on like what phase your business is in. Like if you showed me those numbers but said it's trending up each year, then I'd say, well done. It's a 6-figure business and it's making profit. That's huge. Great job. You know, many people would dream of those numbers when they're starting out, but because it was trending down and had been for a couple of years now, it's a completely different story. So perspective, I guess. Year 11, 2024 to 2025. Thank you for the memories. As you know by now, Christmas was always a good time for my business because the products did have a fair bit of like giftability. So I knew we'd at least make some profit there, but I couldn't help but feel like I was just going through the motions a bit. Like I wasn't trying anything new. I definitely wasn't excited about it anymore. And to be honest, every time an order came in, I'd think, oh, great, now I have to pack that, which is obviously not how you should feel about your business at all. And it's probably a good litmus test for whether you should even be running the business anymore. So when the dust settled after Christmas and January came around, I hadn't actually been planning to close the business, but I'd been feeling obviously sad about it for a while, and maybe subconsciously I knew the writing was on the wall. Anyway, one Sunday afternoon, I decided to rip the band-aid off. I emailed my accountant to let him know I'm closing the business, and I began liquidating the stock through a series of sales. And that brings us to today. Like it's closed. It closed a few weeks ago officially. Obviously it felt sad to do, but I think not as sad as when I first realized it was going this way, which may have been about a couple of years ago before we got to this point. I felt like I'd already mourned the loss of the business, and if anything, the emotion I felt when actually closing it was more like relief. Like, yeah, I can put in a few hours each week and make an extra 15K a year, but to what end? The business was never going to grow. So I'd rather spend that extra time on a new business, which is growing, and that's this channel. So making videos like the one you're watching now to help you learn from my experiences. And if I want to take the whole weekend off to spend with my daughter, I can. So I'm happy about it now, to be honest. Like, will I start another online store again someday? I'm almost certain I will at some point, because I did and still do love the process. I've just fallen out of love with that particular business, and it was time. It was time to let go. If you're in the process of starting or growing an online store, it is tough work, but so worth it. and there are loads of mistakes and potential pitfalls which might seem obvious to people like me who've been through the whole process, but they might not be obvious if you're doing it for the first time. So this video here covers all the key things to watch out for, or if you're not even sure about how to start a business legally in Australia, this video covers registering a business, setting up tax, insurance, etc., all of that. Thanks so much for coming on this journey with me. It felt like an important video to make. Hit like if you're still watching. I'm Andy. Catch you next time.